Here we are. Hello, everybody. It's episode 6.
Can you believe it's already episode 6?
When we started, you're at the beginning of a project and you sort of feel as though it's some insurmountable task that's going to take forever to get through. But at the same time, we've done projects enough, I think, that you know that after a certain amount of time, you're going to build like this repertoire of
Yeah,
work. And we're kind of there now. We're at really the halfway point of the season,
it
actually.
is. Oh my God, I hadn't realized it was the halfway point.
The last episode, Annie's, we debuted at IATEFL. It was the first time that I had been able to talk about the project live in front of an audience. And one of the things that I didn't tell you yet, but was pretty cool, were people who have never seen me give a talk before, but they were in the audience this time. So, for
Uh-huh.
example, Scott Thornbury, my good friend Scott,
Oh,
uh,
Scott is the best.
was at this one. So we got to display different excerpts from every one of the episodes so far. And at that point, episode 5 with Annie had not come out yet because I was debuting it on the last day of the conference. And my talk was on the first day of the conference. So it was
Hmm.
kind of like a sneak peek for everybody coming up. And I thought, wow, this timing is perfect. I also showed a couple of the excerpts from the materials that you had started to put together for episodes 1 and 2,
Cool.
as well as a little bit for Annie's episode. And so it was kind of fun to see the sort of reaction people had to it.
Oh,
Um,
that's so nice.
yeah, and there were a lot of Brazilians in the audience, actually. So Annie's episode was highly anticipated, I would say.
It was extra special then.
Now we're coming up to who?
We're going to be talking about someone who's just so sweet. Ethan. Ethan is just so honest and so soft. And I think part of the challenge that queer people have in this world after so much suffering and usually pain and battles is to stay soft, not let those experiences like harden you. And I think Ethan is the embodiment of that, of the person who managed to stay soft and kind and still look at the world with like beautiful eyes and a beautiful lens.
I think that, I always tell my partner that, being queer is such a privilege for me. And I think that's such a gift for me because I won't be able to like trap into like one side of perspective, but I would be able to like have the freedom to explore the different parts of myself, my identity. And when we talk about like gender spectrum, for example, right? And, I also identify with myself as non-binary, like I use they them as my pronoun, but I also think that that give me a lot of possibility to explore, like the masculine side and feminine side of it. And then, like how, in the gender spectrum, I can navigate the different parts of that, you know. I don't have to completely like on the male side or like female side, but I can be like both at the same time. I'm very proud of my intersectional identity. I am a Vietnamese. I'm queer as F. Wherever I go, I also make sure that I represent my queer identities. Did you see that I'm wearing? I'm gonna share it a little bit.
Ethan has this wonderful t-shirt that says a little bit dramatic.
A little bit traumatic
So
with a pink necklace. So I think it is very, very much representing myself, my queerness, who I am. And I'm also sitting in a space where I feel comfortable, feel safe with the rainbow flag in the back of the room. When people come to my house, people see that, hey, this is a safe space, it is a queer space. I'm also a writer, an educator, a researcher, a leader. But I'm also, English is my second language, but I'm consider myself as a multilingual learner and leader. And I'm very much proud of myself as the work that I'm doing so far. And I love to connect with people. I love to listen to people's stories. I feel like, listening to other people's stories is going to make a lot of impact on myself. So yeah.
I love that when you started, you mentioned like your intersectional identities, because
Right.
of course here in our podcast, we're focusing on being queer. And that is something that we all have in common, like everyone here,
Mhm.
probably the listeners as well. Maybe the listeners are allies, but all the interviewees and Tyson and I. But when we talk about your other identities, do you feel that sometimes the queer identity comes first, depending on the context? Or which identity or identities do you feel that sometimes are a little bit more dominant?
I would say that things happen simultaneously because when I come to the space, I always like wearing the necklace, right? Pearl necklace or, some sort of colorful necklace that represent myself. And people, when they see me, then they will say, oh, Ethan is a queer person, or it's kind of like causing them to questions about my identity when I come to the public space right away. I know who I am. I know the purpose of my identity in this space. I just traveled to Brazil, for example, right? I went to Sao Paulo, I went to Aracaju. I was invited to give a talk to the students. And I came to the space wearing áo dài, which is a Vietnamese traditional clothes. And I'm also wearing, the pearl necklace, and people saw that right away. People saw me. But also at the same time, I engaged with the students and the faculty with the conversation about gender in Brazil. So the work speaks for itself, but also the queerness come simultaneously as well to show that, I really do the work. I think when we think about queerness, our queer identity and the work that we are doing, it is inseparable, but it also have to go hand in hand.
It got me thinking that we as queer people, sometimes we are put in these boxes that are part of who we are. Mm-hmm. But as much as they are part of who we are not fully them, like 100%.
One of the points Ethan made in terms of intersectionality was about being Vietnamese. When I was listening to that part specifically, I thought, what amount, if you're gonna like put a percentage on your intersectional identities, what amount would you say is each one of them? Or are they like equally spread, Or does it change by situation that you're in or context that you're in? And I think you made that point actually. I think for me, Canadian, for example, is not an identity that I attach that strongly to myself. And
Tell me more.
I think it's because I've never felt patriotic in any sense, in any sense of the word, in any context, right? So not to a school, not to a flag, not to a national anthem, all of this kind of stuff.
Everyone loves Canadians, like.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's not. You guys are really so nice.
I
I think Canadians are very polite. And I know that's a stereotype, but I believe that is true. It's the only
please.
It's really the only place that you're going to like bump into a person and they are going to be the one saying sorry, like sorry, I'm like on the way.
No, you're right. There's a universality to that type of reaction, I suppose, culturally. I don't think I've ever been like aligned perfectly with any kind of made up border. I think part of it is because of this whole idea that there's a best country in the world kind of attitude that some people have about their own countries. I've just never felt that way at all. Like, yeah, there's great things about Canada, but there's some shitty stuff about it too. And I haven't lived in every country of the world, so it's impossible to make the qualification that it is the best country of the world.
But I think when Ethan talks about Vietnamese, being Vietnamese and that being part of their identity. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Vietnam, just like Brazil and other countries that are not seen as cool or as developed or as rich, usually you kind of learn to develop this sense of, well, this might not be the richest country, but there are things here that are really cool and that I really appreciate. I
Mm-hmm.
think when I was a kid, especially like growing up in the 90s, at that time, the USA had this huge influence all over the world. It was
Mm-hmm.
not just Brazil. It's like basically everything was USA, USA, USA. And then you kind of grew up thinking that your country is not so special. And then as you grow older, you learn to realize that there are many things that are very good and special about the place that you come from.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you need to go abroad or live abroad to fully appreciate, understand, and really connect with that identity.
Yeah, but this is the thing: is when you live in the place,
Uh-huh.
you've never had to articulate what is that place's culture. So
Yeah.
only when you go abroad do you start to be confronted with this fact that you have never been able to answer that question,
Mhm.
or you've never had to because nobody's ever asked it. You're sort of at a loss for words at first because, like all the Canadians whom I taught with in Seoul, initially were like, I don't know what the Canadian identity is. Like, is it poutine? You know, like you sort of default to like what is a specifically Canadian food, and that's the only one that anyone could ever think about.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. I think we are all living very crazy times in the world. And when I think about my identities and everything that makes me me, I think in some spaces I'm not necessarily read initially as visually queer. So I feel that sometimes other identities come first. For instance, when you were in Brazil, because of the erasure of Asian identities, you're probably seen as a white person. And I know that sounds crazy, but people in Brazil, most people are going to perceive you as white, not as Asian, because
Huh.
Brazil tends to be kind of black or white. And it's almost like there isn't Asian or other ethnicities. So,
Huh.
yeah,
Interesting.
that is very interesting. For instance, nowadays, sometimes I feel that my Jewish identity comes first in some spaces, which makes me scared because of the
Mm,
rise of anti-Semitism and everything that has to do with the war. And
right.
all of a sudden, everyone who is Jewish or who is remotely any remote connection to the state of Israel becomes a spokesperson for Israel, apparently.
Right.
And and it's just sad because we are sometimes held accountable for things that we do not agree. It can be scary.
I feel you. And when I went to Brazil, I feel there's just those very strong vibes. I would say like the visibility of the queer communities over there. Transgender communities are very like visible. I would say gay and lesbians are very very visible as well. But I think, it depends on where you are that ask the questions of like what comes first, your queer identity come first or other identity. And I feel like, whatever space that we are in, we have to really think about like, like the safety for ourselves first and foremost. Especially, with the queer community, where whatever we are, we are always the target of, the discriminatory arts. And we just have to learn how to navigate the space. We have to learn how to to think. We have to learn how to speak in a certain way, before, sometimes the queerness can come out. At least, when you share about my Asian identities was in the Brazilian space, it caused me a very different perspective in terms of like that I have never thought about that. But also at the same time, as a leaders in some of the spaces, just give me some sort of like the privileges and put me into a different position. So I think, that is when we talk about positionality, when we talk about power, we talk about privilege, and then, of course, in relation to the queer identity, all of them are interconnected.
Do you recall any queer media when you were growing up?
I would say that I grew up in Vietnam and like back then, there's not a lot of like queer media or like queer representation in media. Most of the time that the queer representation was displayed in media is, gender. We call Day in Vietnam. And they were depicted as kind of like the people who are, it just hurt my heart to say this, but it's pretty much that you do not belong to the society. You were kind of a disease. Um, and you know, to some of the people who consider themselves as a gender, like they want to do the transition. So that is kind of like a failure to the society or to the family. So when I grew up, I always like go to some sort of like the places where they call lotto. So it's lotto is the place where you see that it's a kind of like the public lottery plus musical performance in Vietnam, but usually there's not like located in one fixed place, but like the whole group, the whole performance have to like move from place to place. So these, the artists are either like consider themselves a gender, but also those identify as part of like the Bay or queer community in Vietnam. And I grew up seeing them, singing song, trying to like sell, the lottery in the public performance. And I was wondering like, what happened to them? What is the story? But I also see that it is really important because now in Vietnam, there's a lot of like progress about those people. And because of like, the impact of the some sort of like the show, that talk about like gender community over there. But back then in Vietnam, when I grew up, these kind of like the image that makes a really negative impact on the queer community, specifically to the gender community.
Do you think growing up with these examples, do you think it kind of made you feel, kind of made you develop a more negative perspective on yourself and on queerness as a whole?
Course, like when the whole society say that is wrong, right? And then you were a kid, you would say like, wow, something wrong with me. So the notion, the concept of like the whole idea of society saying that being queer is a sin, being queer is, um, is wrong. That makes you feel, and then even like in the school, right? I was being bullied because of, my feminine arts and the way that I speak, the way that I talk, the way that perform. It just make me like a target of like the bullying. So, and then seeing those kind of like the queer representation in media and then people say that, oh, that's wrong, it is sinful, whatever, whatever. It just make me feel like, wow, there's something wrong with me, right? So it scared me. It's, it just, really like freaked me out. And it caused me some sort of like the internal homophobia. Like I hated myself, right? And I feel like I should not have come out to anyone because of my queer identities. And especially in Vietnam, they're very much, patriarchal, um, very heterosexual family. And I think it's just pretty much like the same to most part of the world. So it caused really makes a detrimental impact, on my psychology, on my identity. And that's why when we use the word, navigate or struggle, because we really struggle with our own identity, and we don't have like, the mentorship, we don't have the guidance, we don't have the advice, from those people who walked the path before us. So I always wish that I have some sort of like, the mentor, or, a person that I could come in and talk to them and then share, what I've been going through. So pretty much that, everything that I went through, I have to learn by myself and try to navigate by myself.
So, what I think is so interesting about this is how much being from Vietnam is part of Ethan's identity nowadays. And at the same time, they felt like they didn't really belong in Vietnam, growing up in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. So, and then the representation that trans people had back then. And I think it just goes to show how complex our identities are, and not only complex, but how our identities are bound to change throughout our lives. Yeah. But maybe that's something that I would like to provoke our listeners with. I want you all to think of parts of yourself that once you thought didn't matter or were just not important, and nowadays are vital.
Queerness is much more something I identify with now than, say, 20 years ago. So even though I'm not any less gay then or now, it's the same amount. I've been out the same amount that I was in both times. Being gay or identifying as queer is much higher on my list of identities now than it used to be. And that may be partly because of the work that I do, so I'm just constantly talking about it. But I think when I started out, I was like, started out with thinking about who I am, basically. Mm. I didn't really like labels that much, actually. I didn't want to be categorized as gay or bisexual or whatever other fluid versions of that there were available, because I just didn't like being boxed in to committing to, like, this is what I am. And now, while I still think labels are perhaps sometimes out of control these days, I don't mind being labeled the ones that I am labeled, right? It doesn't bother me quite as much.
I totally see where you're coming from. And I think that's one of the things that makes me love the word queer. Mm. Because, for instance, when I think about our queer identities and having queer as like this umbrella term, and under that umbrella, I would be under the transgender box. And also the intersex box.
Right.
And the thing about being intersex is that it impacts my life in many different ways, health-wise. So it's something that I'm constantly reminded of, the things that my body is able to do and the things that my body is not able to do. It's not that the trans identity is not important and it's not there, but it's just not something that I think about, because it doesn't, and I know I say this from a place of privilege, that I don't get to think about that. Mm-hmm. But that's the reality. Your work is very important.
Thank you.
And it is. It is. And what is it like now when you go to Vietnam? Because, for instance, going back to positions of power, again, because I am initially read as a white woman, that makes those very same people who mistreated me see me in a different light, which is very hypocritical, I know.
That is a good question. So I was invited to give a keynote speech, at the very first conference about Global South in Vietnam back in August 2024. So, when everybody talks about, research and stuff, I talk about my queer identity when I was in Vietnam. But I talk about the in-betweenness of a queer person, growing up in Vietnam and then travel to, immigrated to the US and then, got all of the work that I really wanted to do. And then I came back and then I talk about like the struggles of those people who live in betweens. And in every single space that I came in, like during the trip when I was when I came back to Vietnam, right? So I visited to the different universities, in Vietnam, in the south, in the north. But here's the thing, I talked to those people who are like associate dean, right? Or like who are the dean of the college, for example. And when I came to this space, I wore with the necklace, and the necklace is just showing me that when we talk about the object, so necklace is pretty much that represented my queer identity, right? It just like make a very strong statement that, hey, look at me. I'm a leader, but I'm also an openly queer with a colorful jacket, for example. I think that, with that kind of representation in the public space, especially in academic space, when I, talk with the different people who have a power and privilege, right? That makes a statement for them that that is a time for us to accept the queer community, the queer leaders who, have the roots and identity back in Vietnam and come to the US and then come back to Vietnam. So that is the whole process of being very queer Vietnamese, but also a leaders, um, give me a lot of ways to reimagine what education should look like in the future and incorporate the queer identity into the conversation and the policy.
I love that. You mentioned coming out earlier. How was it for you? How did you come out?
So my coming out experience was smooth. My parent was very supportive. So I remember that I was sitting with them and then I say, hey, dad and mom, I say, hey, dad, mom, I have something to share with you. I think it is time for me to make a decision to get married with a person. I didn't use like a man or something. I say a person. So my dad said, "Oh, that's good. It's time for me to have a baby. To have a grandchild." And I say, "No, Dad. Actually, I was thinking to get married with a man." So they paused. My dad say that, okay, as long as you are happy, we are happy. That's it, period. No question, nada. And my mom say that we already knew it. We knew it.
Moms always know, right?
They all,
They
for some
always
reason,
know.
they always knew, but they just waiting for us to like talk with them, like tell them, to their face. So I think, when my mom and dad, was in that space and telling me that, hey, Ethan, it's okay. We are happy for you. We are supporting you. So I know that I have the privilege, you know, compared to like most of the other people who don't have the parents or, the family supporting their queer identity. But for me, I guess, because of all of the work that I've been investing and doing, not only for myself, but also for family, for the queer community as well, it just give them a very good image about, what a queer person look like and do, rather than, based on what the media tells you. or tell them, I'm ruling a message that, we're still a human being. We do the good stuff as well.
And I think, as you said yourself, you're helping change their views and a lot of people's views on what a queer person is.
The interesting part though is they did start with, oh, that's good. It's time for you to have a baby. So there was like a heteronormative start to the conversation or response to the
Yeah,
conversation,
yeah.
even though they already knew that Ethan
Even though they
was
already knew. Yeah.
not heterosexual.
Sometimes we perhaps underestimate parents, especially mothers, and how sometimes people surprise us in the best way possible. And I think as queer people, we're really used to expecting like the worst case scenario.
Mm.
And perhaps we should start expecting the best case scenario.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Having a higher bar of
Yeah.
expectation on how people should react would be a nice shift in the way
Because
queer
people
people
can do
feel.
better.
Yeah,
These days, people have access to information.
yeah,
Like, oh, but this person is older. Come on, but they were not frozen in time.
yeah, no, true. The expectation that you have as a queer person in what, if it's a negative response that you're expecting, can usually impact how it is that you approach that conversation too, right? So you're approaching it apprehensively, which
Right.
sort of sets the tone for what the conversation's going to sound like. Listening to this part made me think of Gaia's episode a little bit when she was talking about after her mother passed away. She wondered if she could have done a better job educating her mother about queer people so that
Mhm.
she wouldn't have had the negative feelings that she died with. And it made me wonder, to what degree are we responsible for educating or setting an example to our families about what queer people are like in order to change their stereotypes from what media has always told them.
I find it sad because it's also something that we need to remember that as queer people or as Black people or as women or as anything, it is not our responsibility to fix the world. And it's just such a burden
Mm.
that no one deserves to live like this, to have this responsibility. People should be more able to just Google things and learn things from themselves.
So
Yeah.
I certainly agree that everybody's responsibility to do their own homework. Very 100%. I wonder for myself sometimes. This is a a weirdly vulnerable thing to say, but
Add one more to the list.
I know shit, right? I haven't been in my, blood family's lives on a daily basis for a long time. Sometimes I wonder if have I done a disservice by not being an example of queer advocacy around them in a daily situation. So, like, there will be times where my sister will discover something about a queer term, for example, or say something that is kind of just misinformed. And I think, oh, maybe if I'd been around more on a daily basis and interacted in her life more, she wouldn't still think this or whatever. And so I do feel a modicum of responsibility for being the person who should have educated, direct members of my family more than I did. So that's sort of where I'm coming from in terms of, I think both Ethan, because they mentioned this themselves, and Guy not doing so, that I feel sort of in between as to whether or not we have any kind of responsibility. And certainly I don't, I think everybody's responsible for themselves, but I think it could have been helped along had I been there more on a daily basis. But it is what it is.
It is what it is. And we also need to remember, which is very easy to forget when we are not in certain situations anymore, why we are not in that situation in the first place.
That's
And sometimes
also
that
a
has
good
nothing
point.
to do with queerness or identity.
Mm.
Not being close to someone is usually not a one-way street.
Yes, you're right.
So
You're so wise sometimes.
sometimes I am.
You know, the last thing I'll say about that is those people could listen to this podcast and actually learn a whole bunch of information about me and maybe people you know about you that they didn't know this whole time. That would probably be surprising. And if they were that interested, they really would just, bite the bullet
Googling
and
your
listen to the
name.
30-minute podcast, you know, because there's so much that comes out. I was talking about this with my friend Tanya the other day, and we're very close, but there's a lot of things that she doesn't know because she's not queer, and so therefore it just doesn't come up in conversation between us.
Right.
Whereas you and I are, and obviously the purpose of this podcast is to talk about it. So there's much more that I'm sort of revealing, quote unquote, about my relationship with my mom or my grandma or how I came out that just has never come up in conversation between me and some of my best friends. And it makes you sort of wonder how much information do I not know about things that they have gone through, even though we're like the best of friends and talk about what, seems like everything. There are certain topics that just don't come up. And
Yeah.
I don't want those people to feel like hurt or neglected that they've never known this aspect of me. But the truth is, it's just never needed to come out. And that's why queer spaces are very important because you get to get a lot off your chest, basically, with people who are interested and know what kinds of questions to ask and what things to talk about.
When we talk about the word power, I think there's just a lot of things to unpack it. But I think, it is time for us to like own it, to embrace that because that is the power that we as queer communities work so hard to achieve it, to
Yeah.
create it, and then trying to like expand it, with other communities. So I think we just go ahead and then I think claim it, you know.
You're totally right. You're totally right. You see, even nowadays, I find myself and other queer people reproducing those limiting beliefs like, no, not in a position of power, no, not privilege, not money. And those are things that we deserve to access as well. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I think if you watch the show like Queer Eyes, and then like those guys actually, those queer artists actually use their power, their expertise to come and to talk with the different people, right?
Have you ever had 5 gay men in your house?
I've never had one gay man in my house.
Really?
Oh, Jonathan.
Wait.
Yo, brace yourself.
And uplift them, inspire them, motivate them. So they have their own work to do. We have our own work to do. We have the power in our classroom, in our academic space, in our research space, in our policy space. So every single of us has the power in our own hand in order to like make some change.
And I love that you mentioned the classroom because sometimes a lot of teachers think that they can't do much when we actually have a lot of power in our classrooms.
Mhm.
If and even when we are in environments that are LGBT phobic, take Brazil again, for instance.
Right.
It can be very complicated in some states, but it's very big, and there are many Brazils inside Brazil. But for instance, Brazil does have laws that protect LGBT people. There are
Right.
laws
I know.
against homophobia. There are laws against transphobia. So I think as teachers, sometimes we might not be able to make a statement, but something that we can always do is to not allow any form of discrimination in class. And because we
Right.
have law to back us up. And
Mm.
that If someone says something about like words that emerge from time to time that people love to use, like, oh, you're indoctrinating our students, you can just refer to the law and you say, no, this person said this. I don't want them to go to jail. So my decision to step up was based on the law. So sometimes we have to be creative.
You also know that because of the law, it prohibits a lot of different conversation, right? You know, if you go back to like 20 years ago, you didn't even talk about like you know, like because of the law allowing some of the people to discriminate against, you know, the queer and gender community, they just like use their power to go over it or to kill people, to murder people, right? But now because of the law that, you know, we have a chance to like speak up and then tell about like what happened to us, right? So I think if we don't take advantage of that, and then especially put into the classroom space, how can, you know, the children be educated about it? And also we have to educate the students about the rights that they have and the way that they can use the rights to protect, to be an advocate, to be an ally.
And on that note, I want to know, how has being queer impacted your social life, your work life, health?
You know that on my LinkedIn, I put, you know, the title, I put myself queer researcher.
Yeah.
And then and then I show myself, you know, in every single space, wherever I go to, I always kind of like showing that, hey, you know, this is me, this is my queer identity. I do queer research. I also publish book about, you know, queer allyship, you know, in English language classroom. And I just got the news from the publisher yesterday that we sold out more than 1,000 copies.
Oh my God, congratulations.
Woo! Thank you. I think that is just really, really, really important for us to kind of like see that and remember, you know, that is the first book. Imagine that. That is the first book that talk about queer allyship in English language classroom. That is crazy, right?
Do you feel that sometimes your queer identity is tokenized?
It's up to us how we see it. It is always have two sides of a coin, right? It's always two sides of a coin. If you flip it in one way, you see that, you know, that is a good opportunity for queer to be visible, right? And why don't you just take the advantage of that to talk about what you're doing, what other queer researchers, educators, students are doing out there. Then also at the same time, you know, from the person who've been organizing the conferences. If we think that it is tokenized, we will think that is in the tokenized. But if we think that it is a way to uplift and then to visibilize, you know, the queer identities in the public space, why not? We have to come back to the notion of the purpose. What is the purpose of doing this? If you are in the conference space and then you see that there's some sort of like sections that have the queer topics and representation and discussion. And as a queer person, you want to show up, right? Or as an ally, you want to show up to those sections and then want to engage in the conversation with them. So I think it increased the visibilities, but also, you know, expand the conversation into the different spaces. From the perspective of a person who organizing the conferences, you know, sometimes we are facing some sort of like the challenge and restriction, you know, depending on the regions, you know, in some of like the areas, you know, for example, some states in the US, you won't be able to talk about queer identity at all, right? So if you have a space in order to talk freely about it, take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Remember that I presented at an international conference, you know, I I have like 6 presentation. I always talk about leadership, talk about, you know, queer identity, queer allyships and all of that. So I feel the burden, right? And especially emotional burden as well. That's why I think that the work of queer allyship is important because, you know, you don't want to do the work by yourself, but, you know, through the conversation and discussion, you engage with people, you invited people to join the movement and allyship and community with you. But if you don't do the work, who's going to do the work?
Yeah.
Right? If you don't really like put yourself out there and then started to say initiate the conversation, then who's gonna do that? Let's say a little Ethan trying to like figure things out around the world, and then was worried about their identities, and then all of a sudden they came to a conference and then they ran into a person who do the work, right? So think about that way. It gives us a sense of purpose of what or why we are doing this work. If I travel to different countries, I talk to students, I know that it's gonna make a lot of impact, but going to like doing the workshop and all of that, if you don't pay me, don't expect me to do the work for you. So that is kind of like the way to offer the counter argument that, hey, you know how long have we been doing this work for you for free? And now we feel like it's time for us to ask for something in return for our story, for our struggles we don't share it for free. You know what I mean? So
I
would you
do know
be
what you
willing to pay for that? And then they would say like, oh, no, 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 no. I say, okay. So then, if they refuse to do that for whatever reason, then you will start to questioning about like the purpose of the conference, right?
mean.
And if you are willing to make a commitment to that space or not. So it's just come back to us as an agent.
I love this, honestly, because it's only fair and on a different note, and lived experience is also experience. Lived experience should be more valued.
People take it for granted though. People say, oh, you are queer. I would love to invite you to come in and talk. Sure.
These are my
Yeah, that is my my account. Can you transfer, like give us a little money to support us? And then I think that is a way, to be fair. We invest a lot of money and efforts, and sacrifice to be here.
On the topic of impacts of your career then. So we talked about work, but about other areas of your life, like your social life, your health, I don't know, bureaucratic life, like licenses and government, spiritual life. Do you see the impact in those areas?
When you mention about spirituality, I think it is also important because, when I go to the temple, people know that I'm openly queer, but they also treated me as the same, like as other people. And then we always joking around like, oh, when will I get married, right? And I always say like, oh, I'm gonna get married to a man. So then they were laughing and so I think that is the way, even like in the spiritual religious space, I think I'm still able to talk about it. I just feel like when I met my partner, but also I have the person who really accept me, for my feminine side and representation, but also accept my vulnerability as well, because when I speak with emotion, as you can feel. I do the work with a lot of emotion in it, with passion as well. So, since I think that the message to the listener is that, when you accepting yourself, I think it's gonna open a lot of different possibilities that you never imagined. Just embrace it. Embrace your identity. Go for it, and then you will never know like the path is gonna open for you. It's also important for us to remember that, we have to understand ourselves first and foremost. If you don't really learn to navigate yourself, your identity, and accept that, I don't think that any other power or higher power can help you, right? Especially on the daily basics. Like, let's say, take on the bus or like go to the train, and if you don't really embrace yourself and learn how to navigate the space, who's gonna help you with all of that?
Love it. it is so important for you to understand yourself and accept who you are. So that connection with that higher power, if that's something that you want to have, is stronger, is more genuine. I just found that very, very beautiful.
Because in order to have a relationship with that higher power, you need to be your honest self. Is that
Yeah.
the bottom line? So
Yeah,
don't lie.
that's the bottom line.
That makes sense. There's an honest truth about the world, including you, and then there's the facade that you choose to put forward when there's someone in the room. And when you are making that facade part of your alone time as well, you're doing yourself a big injustice because you're trying to fool yourself into some false reality. And that is never going to work out well for anybody, especially you.
Wow, I love this. What doors has being queer opened?
I would be able to unpack, the feminine side of myself. I can navigate the different parts of that. I don't have to completely like on the male side or like female side, but I can be like both at the same time. And then the way that I talk to people, it gives me more compassion to be able to listen to them, to listen to their story, and I have the privilege to be able to connect with them. And then when I say I understand it, that means I really mean that I understand.
It's not empty.
It's just not empty, exactly. But it is like I really mean it because I lived through it. I would be able to relate to what you went through because I lived through it.
On this note, I want us to end with the queer joy.
Yay! I have so many. What should I say? Where should I start? Well,
Most recent.
meeting you is one of my queer joy.
Oh, you're so nice.
You taught me more than I ever asked for or imagined. Like ever, like really, like you taught me so much, Taylor, like so much. You give me knowledge, love, the bravery, the courageous, a lot of sense of purpose to live. You give me the reason, the purpose of why I'm doing this work. You open a lot of doors for me, literally.
I'm just
Literally.
so happy to hear that and so flattered because just for some context for the listeners, I've participated in his previous studies.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot, and I just feel really honored because as you said yourself, sometimes we do this work and it does get so tiring, and whenever we are able to contribute to another queer person who does understand our struggles, who does say, I understand you, I get you. And it's not just empty words. They're just not being kind.
Talking with you and then thinking with you and walking with you is always my queer joy. It helps me a lot with the understanding of myself as well. That is kind of the way to take care of ourselves, in all of the crazy life here. So, but anyway, I really enjoyed the conversation today, Tay. Thank you so much for inviting me to the conversation.
Yes, to us.
Of course, I will never say no to the invitation from you and Tyson. So, yeah.
I'm Giovanni.
I'm Elizabeth.
My name is Thiago Mitoso.
My name is Ethan Trin.
Kanako Sula.
Most of my peers call me Ani.
David Monroe.
I am 27 years old.
And I'm 57. Did I say that? 57 years old.
I'm 32 years old.
I'm 48 now.
So I moved to Vancouver probably about
35 years ago. I grew up in Saskatchewan.
I'm half American and half Italian.
I am currently based in the city of São Paulo.
I'm a British woman.
I live in the north of France.
Growing up in my small town in Turkey.
And I'm an English teacher from Brazil, like living in Manaus, Amazonas.
I grew up in Vietnam.
In Chiang Mai, Thailand.
I would say pansexual and bigender.
A cis lesbian, although generally my preferred self-descriptor is queer.
I identify as a travesti.
I came out as bisexual, queer.
Bisexual, pansexual, and aromantic.
Well, queer, more and more.
I'm not particularly fond of the word man. I love the term queer.
Being queer. Queer as F.
Hi, I'm Taylor Vega.
And I'm Tyson Seaburn, and you're listening to Workbook. Workbook is produced by me, Tyson, and is a community-driven queer ELT podcast and materials project. Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next.
Unfortunately, I have to deal with the fact that you're not attracted to women, so I'm never gonna have my lavender marriage with you. So
No, probably not.
yeah, so
And
I'll have to rely on Chad. So Chad,
Yes,
if you're
exactly.
listening to this, I'm
Exactly.
still here.
We'll reiterate your marriage proposal in this episode too and see, like, okay, this is the second time. Maybe third time will be the charm. So we'll have to bring it up again.
Exactly.